Welcome to my channel. Tonight we're going to discuss fentanyl, dead bodies in the streets. There's some word facts, how a word pharmacy by definition is for witchcraft and sorcery. The definitions for pharmacy. And you have to ask yourself, why are people getting into sorcery and the illegal drug use? They're doing it for pleasure. They're given unto pleasure. And again, the definition, it's an abstract noun meaning sorcery, magic, the practice of the magic arts. In Revelation chapter 18, verse 23, the scriptures say, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. And we're going to see later on during this presentation the connection between murder and illegal drugs. And again, this is a very familiar image that many people have seen, the amount of fentanyl, a lethal dose to cause death. And sometimes fiction and reality overlap. There's a video game where the plot is set in a fictional history of real-world events and follows the centuries-old struggle between the assassins who fight for peace and with free will and the Templars who desire peace through control. So what happened historically, the assassins had attacked the Knights Templar in Jerusalem. And here's a definition of the words assassin. The word assassin is actually connected to the word drugs. And assassination is a term thought to be derived from hashish, a drug similar to marijuana said to have been used by Hassan dan Sabah to induce motivation in his followers, who were assigned to carry out political and other murders, usually at the cost of their own lives. And one of their creeds, we are one brotherhood. As we share the glory of our victories, so too should we share the pain of our defeats. In this way, we grow closer, we grow stronger. And again, Hassan Sabah was the founder and known as the group, founder of the group known as the Order of Assassins. And again, this group attacked the Knights Templar in Jerusalem. And these assassins reached not only using hashish, but using other hardcore drugs to such a level in the spirit realm that they were piercing the third veil. They were entering a higher dimension in the spirit realm through drugs. And again, this is some of the sayings of the assassins. We work in the dark to serve the light. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. And again, when we look at some of the adverse reactions of these hardcore illegal drugs, we're not just talking about side effects like dry mouth or dizziness. We're talking about effects such as mania, insomnia, anxiety, agitation, confusion, amnesia, depression, paranoia reaction, psychosis, hostility, delirium, hallucinations, abnormal thinking, depersonalization, and lack of emotion. So we're talking about a prescription for violence when you take illegal drugs. Illegal drugs induce violence. They induce distortions of reality, and they induce hallucinations. So it's a shocking link between these psychiatric and illegal street drugs causing suicide, violence, and mass murder. And what's going on here, as we know, Big Pharma and the cartels in Mexico are flooding drugs into Canada. And people are being found dead in the street. And that's what I'm telling you this evening. People are being found dead in the street. And we're talking about compulsive, overwhelming suicidal thoughts or homicidal thoughts and urges. We're talking about violent deaths as a result. We're talking about crippling injuries as a result. For example, the Columbine, well-known mass killer Eric Harris, he was on drugs, antidepressant Luvox, and when he and fellow student Dylan Klebold went on a hellish school shooting rampage in 1999, killing 12 students and a teacher and wounding 24 others before turning the guns on themselves. Another 1998, Kip Kingle, 15, murdered his parents, and then at age 15, and the next day went to school and opened fire on classmates, killing 2 and wounding 22 others. He was on a prescription of Prozac and Ritalin. And of course, the famous Jeffrey Dahmer in July 1991, where he killed 17 young men and boys, not only killed them, but disfigured them. He was on tranquilizers and antidepressants. And this is also affecting our homeless on the streets in Canada and the US. Fentanyl and a stronger form of meth are now driving America's homeless. In Canada, substance-related poisonings and homelessness in Canada, a descriptive analysis of hospital data, which we're not going to go into that in detail. But there definitely is a stronger and more dangerous version of methamphetamine and fentanyl, and it's helping to drive both Canada and America's homeless crisis, with users quickly slipping into debilitating addiction and mental illness that make it impossible for them to function in society. This is just a guesstimation, not an exact figure. It's impossible for them to calculate an exact figure. But in Canada, there's an average of 235,000 people experiencing homelessness in a given year, and a minimum 35,000 on a given night. Again, CBC Vancouver, fentanyl overdose victim lives with brain damage, and there's so many people that do survive it, but they're survived with crippling brain damage. Here's Dalhousie University on the east coast of Canada, where they did a study, they did research, substance abuse amongst Canadian professionals, health professionals. And they are saying here, let's talk openly about your use of substances. And in a recent study, a group of health professionals shared that in the past year, and we find out that 4.5% had used cocaine. And if they're buying it off the street, more than likely laced with fentanyl. And some of the basic elements of forensic toxicology in a medical examiner center, previously known in the olden days, they called it the morgue. But in the medical examiner center, there's a forensic toxicologist, and we're just going to discuss some of the basic things that job entails. In the circumstances where we do laboratory testing, they'll do testing if there's a homicide, an accident, a suicide, or natural disease. Why do we need to test blood for drugs and other things? How are we going to use this information? We need to ask the questions, was a drug the causal agent of death? The primary use of drug or poisoning or environmental exposure? Some children that are in these houses where their parents are doing drugs, they're environmentally exposed to these drugs and harming the children. And ancillary findings in other kinds of death, homicides. Why do we do this? Was not taking a drug related to death, and also for public health reasons. how to decide in the presence of significant toxicology findings. They need to ask, what was the primary versus the contributing cause of death? It depends. You need to determine that there was a drug present. Quantification should be done in different matrix than the one used for screening. There's pharmacokinetic considerations. Are you measuring an active metabolite at the morgue? What is the half-life of the drug you're analyzing? Is the drug better measured in another body fluid? Is there cross-reactivity with other compounds present? Is the drug protein binding and VD? Another question, what if you have a combination of Schedule 1 drugs, of a Schedule of 1 drugs with prescription or over-the-counter drugs, narcotic analgesics, methadone, what type of THC, can it cause death, antidepressants, SSRIs? What if you have 2 or more drugs known to be associated with an increased risk of sudden death? What they call the trifecta of alcohol, heroin, and cocaine. And of course, fentanyl and other narcotic analgesics. And then there's the post-mortem redistribution. Tongue-tied on that one. And many compounds have different concentrations before and after death. Measured drug concentrations vary depending on sampling site. And so, for example, alcohol has practically no post-mortem redistribution. And so it's important to sample different sites on the body during the autopsy. And usually there's death in the streets caused by fentanyl, and the news media never reports on it. But when there's a sensational story like this recently in the news, January the 23rd, 2023, and in this case, reported by multiple different news sources, but in this case, we're looking at the one from the New York Post, where the Seattle morgue ran out of room to put fatal fentanyl victims, to put the corpses, to put the bodies. They had no room left. And again, Seattle's morgue is running out of room for bodies, which are piling up from fatal fentanyl doses. They'll actually have a freezer. They'll put the bodies in body bags, and they'll stack the bodies on top of each other right up to the ceiling on a giant freezer. And I mean giant walk-in freezer. Space issues have become so acute that officials are considering keeping bodies on gurneys and partnering with funeral homes for storage. And again, here's by CBC Canada. Fentanyl is a drug that is 100 times more potent than heroin. And the drug's potent punch per smuggled brick is exactly why dealers like fentanyl. Here's a case in Burnaby, British Columbia, where they actually had a mixing fentanyl lab right in the kitchen of the house. And again, if children are living in this house and exposed to this, it's an environmental toxicity. And on that counter, on that kitchen counter, there were scales dusted with white powder. The recipes were all over the place on sticky notes, and the lab equipment for diluting this potent opioid, they used a NutriBullet blender. And CBC reported, let's not kid ourselves that the dilution is happening in a professional chem lab. It's not. It's actually happening in people's homes. It's happening in someone's kitchen. It's happening in the basement of their home. But it's also a key reason why people are dying. And we have dead bodies in the streets. And also these people that we talked about earlier that have violence, they use that also in domestic violence against spouses, and when they're under the influence of these hardcore drugs. So thank you for listening. If you like our channel, please press the like button. And thank you again from Niagara Falls, Canada. Have a good evening.